My boyfriend of 8 years cheated on me with my best friend the night before her wedding. I was the maid of honor. But when I took the microphone during the ceremony and exposed everything in front of 200 guests, the millionaire groom left her at the altar with nothing. I'm 28 years old. I run my dad's office supplies company, and I need to tell this story because what happened 2 years ago basically destroyed my entire social life, my 8-year relationship, and my trust in people. But also, and this is the weird part, it ended up being the best thing that could have happened to me. I know it sounds like those kind of cheesy motivational Instagram stories, but it's the truth, and there are still days where I can't believe all of that actually happened. I should start at the beginning, I guess. I met Derek in college. I was like 20 years old. He was 21, and we were part of this super tight friend group. You know, the kind you think are going to be your friends forever because you spent all those years together through parties, exams, college drama, and all that. There were 7 of us total, 4 guys and 3 girls. And Derek and I started dating in our sophomore year. At first, it was amazing. I mean, he was attentive, funny. We got along well, and everyone in the group said we were the perfect couple, that we were going to end up married with kids and all that movie stuff. Tiffany was my best friend in that group. Actually, we were roommates freshman year, and she would always say that Derek and I gave her hope that true love existed. Stuff like that. Pretty ironic looking back. The years went by, and Derek and I stayed together after graduation. We moved in together like 4 years ago, to a decent apartment in the city. Nothing fancy, but it was ours and I loved it. I started working full-time at my dad's company, which sells office supplies, stationery, that kind of thing. And eventually I started taking on more responsibilities until I was basically running the whole business. Derek worked in marketing for a mid-sized company, made good money, and in theory, everything was going perfectly. The friend group was still super close. We'd see each other at least once a month. We'd take trips together, celebrate birthdays. You know, we were those people who post group photos with hashtags like squad goals and all that stuff. But here comes the problem. And looking back, I should have seen it coming way earlier. I wanted to get married. It's not like I was obsessive about it or anything, but after 8 years together, 4 living under the same roof, I was 28 and wanted to start planning my life, like thinking about marriage, maybe kids in a few years, buying a house, all those adult things you're supposed to do when you've been with someone for almost a decade. Every time I brought up the topic, Derek got weird. It wasn't that he said no directly, it was more like he evaded it. He'd say things like, "We're still young, there's no rush, we're fine like this. Why ruin something that works with papers and ceremonies?" And I, being honest, swallowed those excuses because I loved him and thought he'd eventually be ready, that he just needed time. Tiffany, on the other hand, met Lawrence like a year before all this. Drama. Lawrence was an older guy, and when I say older, I mean he was like 60 years older than Tiffany. He was literally old enough to be her grandfather. She'd always been kind of materialistic, truth be told, always talking about designer bags and expensive trips. But when she met Lawrence, it was like she won the lottery because the guy came from a super wealthy family with generational money. 6 months after meeting, they announced they were getting married. And although we all thought it was super weird, and obviously she was with him for the money, nobody said anything because, well, to each their own, right? Tiffany asked me to be her maid of honor, gave me this whole speech about how I was her best friend and she couldn't imagine that day without me by her side. And obviously I said yes because I thought we really were best friends. The wedding was planned at a really nice hotel on the outskirts of the city, with all the pomp you can imagine because Lawrence was paying for everything, and apparently there was no budget limit. The week of the wedding, I was super stressed with work. Some orders had come in wrong. We had problems with a supplier. My dad was traveling and I was handling everything alone. And to top it off, one of my horrible migraines started. I've suffered from migraines for years, and when I get a bad one, it's debilitating. Like I can't even see well. I get nauseous. It's a disaster. The day of the wedding rehearsal. Friday night, I got one so bad that I told Derek I wasn't going to be able to go to the rehearsal or the dinner after. 2. Please apologize to Tiffany for me, and that I'd be fine for the ceremony the next day. I took my medication and stayed in the hotel room, because we'd already checked in and everything, trying to sleep so it would pass. Around 10 at night, I woke up feeling a little better. Not perfect, but functional. And I realized I didn't have any more pills in my bag. I remembered I'd left my medication bottle in the car, so I went down to the hotel parking lot to get it. The parking lot was half empty, because it was late and most people were still at the rehearsal dinner, and as I was walking toward where I'd left my car, something caught my attention. My car was like shaking. Subtly, but it was moving. And there were two people inside. My first reaction was like, what the hell? Someone broke into my car, and I walked over quickly to see what was happening, and what I saw basically destroyed me completely. Derek was in the driver's seat, and Tiffany was on top of him, making out like the world was going to end tomorrow. They weren't having sex yet, but they were clearly heading there. Derek's hands were everywhere. Her dress was half pulled up, and I just stood there like an idiot for what felt like 10 years, but was probably just a few seconds. I didn't do anything. I didn't scream. I didn't bang on the window. I didn't make a scene. I just turned around and went back to the hotel on autopilot. I know why I didn't react in that moment. I think my brain just couldn't process what I'd just seen. It was so surreal. It didn't seem real to me. I went up to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed trying to breathe because I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. My boyfriend of 8 years, who I lived with, who I'd planned my future with, was making out with my best friend in my car the night before her wedding. It was so twisted I couldn't even process all the levels of betrayal in that image. After like half an hour sitting there in shock, I heard voices in the hallway. I went out to the room's balcony, which overlooked an interior courtyard of the hotel, and down below was the whole friend group. They'd come back from dinner and were in one of the rooms with the balcony door open, drinking and laughing. And then I heard Angela, one of the girls in the group, say something that made me realize this was way worse than I thought. She said, and I remember it perfectly, because the words were burned into my brain. Hey, do you think Julia suspects anything? Like Derek and Tiff took forever to get to dinner, and everyone laughed. Someone else, I think one of the guys, said nah, she has no idea. She's kind of oblivious to those things. And Derek spoke up and said she's upstairs with a migraine. She didn't even come down. We're good. I stood there listening while they kept talking, making jokes about how obvious the situation was, about how Derek and Tiffany weren't discreet at all, about how it was amazing I hadn't figured it out yet. Someone mentioned they'd been seeing each other for like 2 years, and everyone had been covering for them, making up excuses, helping them hide the affair. Angela made a comment about how it was funny that I was the maid of honor at the wedding when the bride was sleeping with my boyfriend, and everyone thought it was hilarious. They were mocking me, to my face. And the worst part is that absolutely, every one of my supposed friends, knew. I didn't cry that night. I think I was beyond crying. I was in a place of rage and shock where I just couldn't process normal emotions. I stayed up all night thinking, planning, trying to decide what to do. I could confront them right there. I could pack my things and leave. I could cancel the wedding somehow. I had 1,000 options, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wanted this to hurt. I wanted Tiffany and Derek to pay for what they did to me. I wanted all those supposed friends who had laughed at me behind my back to see exactly who I was. The next morning, I acted completely normal. Derek came back to the room around 2 inches the morning, kind of drunk, and I pretended to be asleep. In the morning, I got up, got ready, put on my maid of honor dress, did my makeup, and went to Tiffany's room to help her get ready like I was supposed to. She was there all excited, talking about her big day, about how perfect everything was, I'm going to be. And I just smiled and nodded while inside I was calculating exactly what I was going to do. I helped her with the dress, with her hair. I told her she looked beautiful. I did everything a best friend is supposed to do on the wedding day. The ceremony started at 3 inches the afternoon. The place was full of people, probably like 200 guests. Lawrence's family, friends, business colleagues. Everyone dressed up in this elegant hotel ballroom with flowers everywhere and decorations that probably cost more than my car. I was standing up front as maid of honor. Derek was sitting in the front rows looking nervous, and Tiffany came walking down the aisle on her dad's arm looking like a fairy tale princess. The ceremony progressed normally. There were readings, music, the officiant said his things, and we got to the vows part. After Lawrence and Tiffany said their written vows, the officiant asked if anyone had anything to say before they proceeded with the ring exchange. That was my moment. I raised my hand. Everyone turned to look at me like, what's happening? And I asked permission to say a few words. Tiffany looked at me, confused but smiling, probably thinking I was going to give some emotional speech about our friendship. The officiant looked uncomfortable but nodded and gave me the microphone. I started very calmly. I said I'd known Tiffany for 8 years in college, that we'd been roommates, best friends, that I'd been there for all her important moments. I said that true love was something beautiful and that I was happy to see two people commit to each other. And then I said, but I think it's important that everyone here know that the bride has been having a 2-year affair with my boyfriend Derek. I pointed at Derek in the audience. And that last night I found them making out in my car, in this hotel's parking lot. The silence that followed was so deep, you could hear a pin drop. I kept talking before anyone could react. I said I found it particularly interesting that Tiffany had asked me to be her maid of honor while sleeping with Derek, and that our friend group, I pointed at Angela and the others, I had known all this time and thought it was funny to mock me behind my back. I said I'd heard their conversations the night before where they laughed about how oblivious I was, how easy it had been to fool me. I mentioned that according to what I'd heard, this affair had been happening under my nose for 2 years while I lived with Derek and planned a future with him, while I asked him to marry us, and he told me he wasn't ready, but apparently he was ready enough to cheat on me with my best friend every chance he got. Tiffany's face went from confusion to absolute panic. Derek had stood up and was like trying to get out of his row to get to where I was. Lawrence, the groom, was standing there at the altar looking between furious and humiliated. I just put down the microphone, grabbed my purse, and walked toward the exit of the ballroom, while everyone exploded in murmurs and shouts. I heard Tiffany calling me, Derek shouting my name. I saw Lawrence taking off his lapel mic and leaving the altar in the opposite direction, and Angela trying to hide behind other guests. I didn't turn around. I left the ballroom, went up to my room, grabbed my suitcases that I'd packed that morning before anyone woke up because I already knew I wasn't going to stay after this, and left the hotel. On the way to the car, I heard the chaos that was left inside, music that stopped abruptly, screaming, people leaving the ballroom, and I just got in my car and drove back to the city. I felt strangely calm, like I'd done exactly what I needed to do. That night, back at my apartment, well, the apartment I shared with Derek, but which I paid most of because I made more. Derek started calling and texting me. I didn't answer any of them. Finally, he sent me a long text. Around 11 at night, saying I'd ruined Tiffany's life, that she'd lost everything, that Lawrence had left and abandoned her there at the altar in front of everyone, that the wedding had obviously been canceled, that Tiffany's parents were furious with her, and that it was all my fault for making that public scene. Also, and this is the part that still seems incredible to me, he told me that Tiffany's marriage to Lawrence was actually a financial arrangement. Apparently, Lawrence knew he was much older than her and had proposed an open marriage where he gave her financial security, and she could do whatever she wanted as long as she was discreet. Tiffany had accepted because she was basically a gold digger looking for financial stability without having to work, and her plan was to marry Lawrence, have access to his money, and keep seeing Derek in secret. I'd completely ruined that plan. Derek kept sending messages saying yes, they'd made a mistake, but I'd overreacted, that we could talk, that things could be fixed. I sent him only one message back, saying he had a week to come get all his stuff from the apartment or I was going to throw it in the trash, and that I never wanted to see or talk to him again. I blocked everyone from the friend group except Derek because I needed to coordinate picking up his stuff, but I completely eliminated everyone else from my life. I deleted photos, numbers, social media, everything. Derek showed up like 9 days later, with his mom and brother to pick up his stuff. I guess he brought backup in case I made a scene. I'd packed all his stuff in boxes and bags. Everything was ready near the door. He tried to talk to me, told me part of the blame was mine, that if I hadn't been so obsessed with getting married, he wouldn't have felt pressured and looked for comfort elsewhere, that Tiffany understood him better than I did, that in recent years he'd felt like I only saw him as a means to get to marriage and not as a person. It was so absurd hearing him try to flip the situation that I almost laughed. I told him I had 30 minutes to get his stuff out of my apartment before I called the police, and he finally left. After that, I did block him too. The following months were weird. I'm not going to lie and say I was perfectly fine, because I wasn't. I cried a lot, like crying fits in the middle of the night, days where I didn't even want to get out of bed, moments where I questioned if I'd done right exposing everything publicly or if I should have handled it more privately. But also, and this sounds kind of weird, I felt liberated. It was like they'd taken a huge weight off me. I started focusing on myself in a way I hadn't in years. Maybe never. I got into the gym really seriously. Not just to look good, but because exercise helped me process everything. I hired a trainer and went like 5 times a week. I started writing in a journal, processing my emotions and everything that had happened. I focused on work, and my dad's company started growing more because I was putting all my energy there. My family was incredible through all of this. My dad, my siblings, my mom, they all supported me without asking weird questions or trying to get me to forgive Derek or anything like that. They let me process everything at my own pace. They were there when I needed them, and gave me space when I needed it. It wasn't easy, and there were horrible days where I felt like garbage. But little by little, things got better. Fast forward to 2 years later. I mean now, or well, a few months ago. Through acquaintances, I found out that Derek and Tiffany had eventually gotten together after all the drama. They got married like a year after the ruined wedding thing, and imagine the irony, they divorced before their first anniversary. Apparently, once it wasn't secret and exciting anymore, and once Tiffany realized Derek didn't have Lawrence's money, the relationship went to hell fast. I heard they had a super ugly separation, fighting over everything, accusing each other of leading them to that situation. Part of me felt something when I found out. I'm not going to lie, but it wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like, see, that's what you got. Me, on the other hand, I'm good. More than good, actually, the company is better than ever. We expanded to 2 new locations and sales are amazing. I'm in the best shape of my life thanks to the gym. Not to brag, but I look and feel great. I have new friends, real people I met through the gym and work networking groups, people who don't have that complicated history with me. And like 6 months ago, I started dating someone new. He's different from Derek in every way. More mature, more honest, more direct about what he wants. We've talked about marriage, about kids, about future plans, and he's completely on the same page as me. There are no games or evasions. Last week, my brother asked me if I ever regretted making that scene at the wedding, exposing them publicly in such a dramatic way. I told him no, not for a second. Was it dramatic? Yes. Was it public and probably humiliating for many people? Also, yes. Did it destroy friendships and relationships? Definitely. But those friendships were already destroyed the moment they decided to mock me behind my back. That relationship with Derek was already dead the moment he decided to cheat on me for 2 years. I just made sure the truth came out in the most impactful way possible, and honestly, it was cathartic. It gave me control over a situation where I'd been the victim for so long without knowing it, and it allowed me to close that chapter of my life definitively. Would I have liked none of that to happen? Of course. I would have preferred Derek to be faithful, for Tiffany to really be my friend, for those 8 years not to feel like a lie now. But it happened, and the way I responded gave me the strength to rebuild my life in a way that honestly is better than it would have been if I'd stayed with Derek. So no, I don't regret it.